Prehistoric art. All right, so this would be the beginning of art history, and we'll be looking through some resources from the AP Art History Handbook. We're also looking at the Brommer Discovering Art History book and Gardner's, which is kind of the Bible for art history, art through the ages, for resources and many other books regarding each of the subjects we talk about in art history. My name is Mr. Martinez, and we'll be talking about prehistoric art. So, we want to start this conversation by pointing out the obvious, right? That our genetics are traced back to about 200,000 years ago with Homo sapiens uh, as a species of people, early humans that were found in Africa. So the different regions of Africa, like South Africa and the eastern part of Africa, where most of our genetics come from. There's a lot of conversation still ongoing today about whether those origins are still proven. However, genetics and science have proven that that is where most of our genetics come from. And then throughout history, we begin to spread, and this is how you can follow the spread of this Homo sapien genetic, moving from Africa into the Middle East, around into North Europe, and into Asia, then into the Polynesian islands, and then lastly into North, Central, and South America. And so the reason that matters is because one of the first defining characteristics of prehistoric art is that humans first needed to hunt. And at that point, I guess our brains were not developed enough to know and understand farming or permanent households. And because of those two things, we needed to hunt. So tools like these arrowheads were some of the first examples of human made objects, but we can't really consider these art because there is a purpose to them and they're very brute. However, the craft and the careful handling of the material could have started a new perspective on how to create art. Um, Today, we talk about handling materials and experimenting with materials and knowing and understanding those materials to create beautiful objects. Those beautiful objects also may have functions. And so, whether this is art as a tool or it's art for art's sake, uh, most historians would agree these are tools and they will not be considered art. And like I said, it does take a lot of craftsmanship. So this carried on into some of the earlier forms of art. And so we want to also define prehistory, right? What does it mean? Prehistory, prehistoric people basically had no written language. They probably didn't have a the way we understand a language. Um, they could have had it, but we don't have evidence of it. And this is a record that we don't have. There is no written record. And so that's why it's called historic or prehistoric. Historic would be that we do have a written record. Prehistoric is we don't have a record. And to think about this in a different way, you want to think about how we each have a history, right? We have traces of our history. And with digital media nowadays, we can look through our Instagrams and different social medias and whatnot, and we can trace over a time period where we have been and the things that we have done. But I think it's more rare for us to have a written record of our families. And so, even in my own family, I don't know anyone in my own family who has a written record of my family. But it would be cool to begin something like that, or to unify the story of our family. And so, maybe on a more basic, idea, maybe we could think about if we have a history or family tree, where you have pictures and you have a diagram of, these are my parents, parents' parents, parents' parents, and see if you can trace back your roots further back. Without the written record, the memories get lost, right, over the hundreds of years. And so when we think of prehistoric, we think of the lack of a written record. And so we do have artwork that's as old as 72,000 years old before the written, or before the current era. But the more noticeable artworks that we're going to talk about are cave art. That doesn't mean that there wasn't other artwork in prehistory. There were beads, decorative beads. There were decorative garments. There were decorative shields and decorative mud sculptures, but nothing as highly rendered and close to what we think of as artwork as the cave artworks found in North Europe. There's a lot of new findings by archaeologists that contest that, but the stuff that we have most photographs and most evidence of are these cave paintings. So Chauvet is in France, and these caves have these beautiful drawings that have been studied. And what they found is that these drawings were drawn over hundreds, if not thousands, of years between one drawing and another. So these are dwellings or caves that people, nomadic people, um, found over and over again, probably through just word of mouth and handed down oral traditions as to where these caves can be found and where the drawings can be found. And maybe even there may have been teachers or just like skills handed down from one family member to another. So the skill of drawing was probably seen as a shamanistic or magical type of skill that not everybody in the nomadic group could have. When I say nomadic, I mean that they are traveling to hunt. They're traveling to find food, to hunt and gather their food. So some of the things that they probably would have seen, this is in France, probably would have seen bears and lions. And so this wall here is showing mostly lions, but at the top there you can see a more bear-like figure on the top of the left-hand side. Um, these are very well drawn images. They're not drawn um, from fantasy. These look like they have been drawn from observation and from careful observation. Even the expressions on some of these faces of these lions have a sort of look to them that is very strong. And so these would have been drawn with charcoal and earth colors, might have been found in their close environment, or maybe the colors of the earth over a long period of time have changed, but more than likely these are colors that our artists have collected in their environment. So the white chalk look, or the white chalk look, and the dark charcoal are things that they would have had, after a fire or after finding a river, finding clay of different colors. And so they used them for these purposes. Now, this is an example of a sculptural artwork. It's showing a lion's head. This is Lion Man of Hohenstein in Stadol, which is in the same North Europe area. This is a lion head on, this would be a tusk of a mammoth, and it's carved super carefully for its age. This is 38,000 years before Christ. We have the carving and we have the careful sanding of this bone into a shape, and that's clearly the head of a lion. And again, this is in Europe. Today, we don't find lions in Europe, right? So it can tell us a little bit about the genetics of animals at the time. So cave art, like I said, was probably first as a sort of document of the kind of animals that exist in the environment. But it more and more over the findings, we see after careful observation that it's more than just identifying an animal. That this may include storytelling, and there's evidence of that storytelling not only in the pictures but on the surfaces of the wall that tell us that there may have been a sort of interaction between the picture and the storyteller. So I'll explain a little bit about that. There are also repeating images, so we can tell that these are not fantastic images that were just kind of coming out of someone's imagination. These were actually studied and that they were tried and tried again. They were repeated images. There are other artifacts that are found with these drawings, right? On the floor, you see evidence of fires and evidence of mud sculptures, or different kinds of clays and rocks and tools, and even the remains of animal bones that may have been food. And we also can tell that there were other animals visiting these caves for thousands and thousands of years. But more than likely, these pictures were used as a sort of communication, whether to identify and tell the people visiting these caves what the animals were around, and also probably more likely to tell stories. The way we tell stories when we think of existential questions about life, we tell stories with images. We more, as children, we enjoy books with pictures. And so this is a good way of supporting that. This is a form of communication or storytelling. And then this could also have been a sort of rite of passage or a shamanistic magical storytelling that would have um, encouraged a young person to heed the warnings of a storyteller. And if nothing more, stories are meant to teach us something about life that we have not yet experienced. And I would like to focus on this picture right here. This is the bird man. So we'll call it bird man because this face right here on this human figure is sort of like a bird. And if you notice his position of his body, he's very stiff, right? So he's like scared stiff. And this may have been added before or after or during the same picture of this. We don't know. We can't really tell. We know that they're identified in the same plane and they're using the same materials to draw these things. But we can tell that this figure was, shown to be in a sort of scared state, maybe lying dead. We're not sure. There's also a bird staff right here. So the bird head and the bird staff kind of shows us something. I'm not sure what that is. Or it could be just an arrow going towards the animal as a sort of a hunting um, explanation of some sort. This object right here with this little shaft and this cross is a clear tool that has been found that prehistoric people used. And so that little shaft right there would have locked in and they would throw the big lance, this thing right here, into the animal. And you can tell that this is meant to be showing that the lance is going through the animal and that the animal's bowels, the animal's guts are spilling out. And the animal is probably in this pose because he's charging against the man here. He's upset and he's charging against the human being. It looks like maybe blood is spilling out of the guts of this animal here. And so this is a sort of story, right? A hunting story. Maybe this man lost his life, and this is a drawing about commemorating his life. We know that these are chips on some of these walls. These are not natural happenings. They have to be chipped off, right? So these stories may have been interactive because there's chipping at the wall itself, as if someone's telling the story and showing the crowd how to hunt or what was happening in the story. More evidence of hunting is the arrows here that repeat and these markings that are pointing towards the horse here. This is an early type of horse, maybe more like a zebra than our horse of that we know of today. Here's another lance or weapon that was used to hunt these animals. And I would like to point out here that the outline of this horse is very, very good. Remember, these are way up on the ceiling sometimes, 20, 30 feet up in the air. Some of them are down low. Some of them are in caves that have to be uh, managed, or you have to manage yourself into some of these really tight nooks and crannies and dark places. And so, for these artists to take the time to find the colors, to render these pictures, to blend these colors, and make these drawings on these walls is no easy effort. While you should be hunting and gathering, some others of the group have enough time to come over here and make these paintings and these drawings. So it shows that they had enough food to be able to have the energy and the time to do this work. And so you would think that an artist would like to sign their work. And so this hand print is one clear example of humans trying to leave a mark, trying to tell their story, trying to basically sign their work and saying, I was here. And you can tell that there are different colors of earth. This may have been traced over. There's lines that are overlapping. So it could have been one person or multiple people reprinting these hands over and over again. So you can obviously this would be someone taking their hand, putting it on the wall, and the spray was probably created by using their mouth, whether they're mixing the earth or the animal fat or animal blood in with the spit of the human and just spitting it out like a spray or a spray can. And so they would be using these materials because that's all they had. They couldn't go down to the street and buy a spray can, right? Um, so here's some other examples, right? So these are more contrasting ones, and there are multiple ones here. This is from the caves of Lascaux, and again, this is northern France. Charcoal, white chalk, calcium deposits that are white, blood, animal fat, anything that would have been gathered out in the environment, berries, uh, or even vegetation, whatever you can use and get your hands on to create pigment, that's what these would have had on them. And so this wall kind of represents, could be one group or it could be different visits by the same person, or it could be different visits by different groups of people all trying to leave their trace behind. And we can tell that there's this sort of overlapping effect and colorful type of effect. Again, these are not down low, they're sometimes really high up on the ceiling. Further evidence of careful observation of the environment are these rhinoceros and these horse heads with evidence of hunting storytelling. There's lines going through these animals in shapes of spears and almost like scar wounds, as if an older hunter was teaching a younger hunter how to make a kill, right? How to provide for the family. Um, and so that would be a rite of passage, right? In your own life, you're going through rites of passages, graduating from middle school, graduating from high school, going off to college. These are moments in our lives that we will remember as a before and after, right? Before I went to high school and after I went to high school, or before I went to my driving test and after I got my driver's license, right? These are rites of passage. These are things you must earn in your lifetime. And so these would have been the rites of passage of a younger prehistoric person, right? They were taught how to hunt, maybe they were taught the strategies and how to hold the tools and how to throw a lance. So you can see that there are, sort of expressions on figures here that are smudges, almost like teaching a student this is where you want to hit the animal to kill them faster and have less chance of injury. Rhinoceros in France, right? So again, more evidence of species in different places throughout time. These are large images of the bulls, and so this is called the Hall of the Bulls. There's also stags, uh, deer, and horses. The Hall of the Bulls. This one is in Spain, I believe. This is the northern part of Spain in the Basque region. These are about 20 feet high, the ceilings, and so you can almost tell like there was a great effort to tell the stories. And so again, because there's no light, there's no electricity, right? These artists must have had to have been helped. And so this was a group effort, and only certain people would have had these skills, right? Their frontal lobe must have developed enough for them to remember how to gather the materials and how to draw and how to observe and how to respect the area in these caves to be able to make these drawings. And they were probably more colorful than what we see them as today. Uh, Again, these were drawn over hundreds, if not thousands of years, over and over on top of each other, and they would have been visited over a long, long period of time. This is prehistoric art. And so, like we said, it's called prehistoric because there's no written language. We want to think about that in our own connection with our own families. And then after the prehistoric period, we have the historic period. And this is an example of a written language, a cuneiform or a hieroglyphic form of artwork here, where pictures and markings create the words and create the language. And so this example kind of tells us that the prehistoric period had ended in this area because now there's a written record. And so we say that for some areas, right? Some parts of the world, like in early Africa and Egypt, that time period would have come faster, where in other parts of the world, like Northern Europe, it would have come much, much later. And even in the Americas would have come a little bit faster, and in Asia, maybe much, much later, just depending on what groups were creating a language and what groups were not creating a language. And so this marks the end of this video for prehistoric